The other night I decided to commit the sin of backing against the team that I support. Despite being from the northwest of England and having a luxury of brilliant teams to support, unfortunately the universe decided that I must instead support Wigan Athletic. There have been some crazy highs along the way, however there have been a lot, and I mean a lot, of very dark lows to balance out those highs. As of early 2025, Wigan are in the midst of one of those lows, which led me to place a lay bet, or to back against, Wigan Athletic when they played Peterborough on the 28th of January. Today I'll be analysing why I placed this bet and in retrospect whether I think this bet was positive EV or not, which may be interesting to you, and I'll be doing this through the lens of addressing this conundrum of whether you should ever bet for or against your team, or will it be the case that your bias will always cloud your judgment. So this bet was a lay bet at about odds of 3 or 2 to 1 on Wigan Athletic against Peterborough, and I placed it on the exchange a few hours before kickoff. The motivation behind this bet is that Taylor Lasgard, Wigan's best player, was on the verge to completing a move to Luton Town. I believe that my edge for this bet was that A, there weren't enough people in the markets that knew that Asgard was about to leave Wigan, and that B, the market wasn't wise enough to how badly this Wigan team reacts in the face of adversity. Yes, the market would obviously be able to see that Asgard wasn't playing this particular game when the lineups were eventually released, but I didn't think the market would factor in how drained of confidence the team would be, knowing that their best player was never going to play for the club again. That was the logic of my position. But was my opinion that this was a positive EV bet a valid one, or had the market already factored in this information? Given what I believed my edge to be for this bet, traditional measures for determining if your bet is good or not, i.e. beating the closing line, I don't think are very useful in this situation because I believe my edge was that the market was not privy to the information that I had. Therefore, the closing line would never reflect, the underlying probability in this context. So now, addressing the elephant in the room. And that is my big assumption that the market hadn't factored in that Asgard was about to leave, or at the very least not factored it in correctly, i.e. not taking account of how much it's going to drain the Wigan players' confidence. The news that the transfer was going to happen was broke by some small journalists on the day of the game, so it was obvious that Asgard wasn't going to play the game. However, no official confirmation of the transfer was going to take place before the game took place. It's pertinent to point out that the edge that I think I have here is a consequence entirely of being a fan of a club in the lower division. If this was a Premier League team and say, for example, it was announced that Trent was going to leave for Real Madrid that evening and they had a game that evening, the market would see that this was going on and everyone would try to price it accordingly. To bring this back to my bet, we have to ask ourselves the question, how many of the deranged gamblers betting English third division football on a Tuesday evening are continuously monitoring 72 local journalists for all the clubs in the EFL, making sure they're up to date of if any of their star players are leaving? I know that I certainly don't track this for other football clubs in the EFL, but that's because I'm a terrible and lazy football bettor. It wouldn't take many competent punters out there with a sizable bankroll to hammer the lines into place if they had priced this incorrectly. So let's go and check the line, shall we? Unfortunately, I didn't collect the odds for this game, so we're going to have to rely on odds portal data, which is, a whole nother can of worms about doing that, which we're not going to go into in this video. You can see that there was a gentle drift on Wigan's odds throughout the day, but it wasn't really much at all. As a matter of fact, it was less than 2% in terms of implied probability. As a bettor, this leaves you in a very uncomfortable position, as you have to start questioning, is this subtle move, the market factoring in something you don't think it's factoring in? Or is this just a subtle, unrelated move that happens all the time in betting odds? There are two reasons why I think this wasn't priced in. Firstly, it's almost as if the market hadn't even priced in Asgard's unavailability at all. Never mind the fact that it was leaving, but in just not being in the lineup. I mean, there wasn't even that much of a move after the lineups had been released. I'm not that much of an expert, but usually when a player who's been directly responsible for 38.4% of the team's goals scored in the season isn't playing, it usually has a bigger effect on the team's chances of winning the game than just making them 1.7% less likely to win. Again, this is a place where fan knowledge really enters into the picture. As a Wigan fan, I know the squad depth and the strength of the potential replacements, and I also know just how badly this team has reacted throughout the season when they've been put under pressure, particularly at home. And the pressure of losing your best player is very significant pressure. So this is one of those times where I genuinely think that, yes, I'm going to put the foot down and say, yes, you know what, I actually do know more than the market for this one particular bet. You know, those are the famous last words a punter says before usually everything goes wrong. The second major reason I don't think this angle was being factored into the market is through the historical examples of seeing in real time significant news not get factored into the market price. I'll tell you a story, the best example that I can remember of this going back to May 2023. Another one of the many dark times that Wigan Athletic have been in that I alluded to earlier in the video. Anyway, in May 2023, the Wigan players had not been paid for unbelievably the 5th time in the last 9 months, which, you know, is pretty remarkable. And unsurprisingly, the players finally decided to say, enough is enough. And most of the first team decided that they would effectively go on strike and not play football. So most of the first team had ruled themselves out for competing on the last game of the season, which incidentally was a dead rubber as Wigan had, surprise, surprise, already been confirmed to be relegated to League One, finishing bottom of the league after numerous point deductions. The reason I'm telling you this story is that Wigan fans knew all of this was going on as it was being heavily reported on in the local press, as you might imagine. It's a big story. People knew that we were going to play this game against Rotherham and we were going to put out a pretty terrible team as we had no choice as many of the first team players were not going to be in the squad. But then when we take a look at the Betfair market, what do we see? Nothing. Literally nothing. A complete, more or less, flat price on Wigan's odds. It was only after the official team sheet was released on the day of the game that finally a huge lay order was placed on Wigan and the odds flew out. Unfortunately, this huge lay order wasn't me, as I don't have the bankroll to be placing bets this size. My measly lay bets are somewhere in these little bets over here. And it isn't even like this was League One, this was in fact the Championship, the second division of English football, and still the market was failing to price in publicly available information. As much as people respect the market, and don't get me wrong, you absolutely must respect the market, but some people, you know, they treat the market as if it's magic, but you know, you've got to understand that it's still human beings who make the prices move. Sometimes human beings equipped with frighteningly expensive and powerful predictive models, but still human beings who are capable of missing things out, especially things that aren't precisely easy to model. And this is the fundamental point. I really get why people don't like backing for or against their own teams. I really, really do. However, at the end of the day, betting is incredibly difficult. And when you have an information asymmetry, which you absolutely do have as a knowledgeable football fan of your own club, in my opinion, I think you have to use that to your advantage. Based off what I discussed regarding the odds and the historical example of the market not pricing in news broken by local journalists, I believe that I was right in assessing that I did have an edge in this particular market and the market had not adequately factored in Asgard about to leave the club, or perhaps more importantly, not factored in the likely effect in confidence it'll have on the rest of the team. And speaking of that effect on the confidence, that raises another question. Is that really an effect? Does losing one of your best players or your best player really make the confidence of the rest of your team drain so much? That is an important question. I think you can sort of just as easily imagine a scenario where losing one of your best players causes the team to get together and to rally and to fight against that adversity. I actually think both of these potential outcomes are possible, which is what makes these types of scenarios one of my favourite things to bet on actually. In my opinion, there have been nowhere near enough examples in football of a shock departure of a player on one day where you have a big enough sample size where you'd be able to accurately quantify what the psychological effect of a team is on losing one of their best players, if that's even something you can model, that psychological effect. But there's just not being a big enough sample size. This makes it a great thing to bet on, because what you'll find when you bet long enough is that anything which is easily quantifiable has already been easily quantified, and therefore there's no longer an edge there. But any situation like this, where it's more up for debate and there isn't an easy quantifiable yes or no answer, then this is where you're going to find your best angles. Yeah, you're not going to be able to calculate your EV of your bets, and no, you're not going to be able to Kelly stake it, if that's even what you'd want to do in the first place, but it is where your most lucrative opportunities are probably hiding. This is where being a really dedicated fan, reading about the club, listening to interviews with the players, has to be an advantage on your part. It has to help you, even if it is introducing a potential bias into your analysis. And I suppose bias is a subject that we will conclude on, as it is the final piece of the jigsaw on this conundrum of betting on your own team and whether you should do it or not. Depending on who you are and what you're like as a person, it's definitely possible that you're almost too much of a cult member of your own football team, and any potential informational advantage that you have over other people who don't know about your club isn't strong enough to beat the overwhelming amount of bias that you're putting into your analysis. Either being irrationally supportive and defensive of your club when you're not doing very well, or on the flip side, taking an almost doomsday-like opinion anytime your club goes through anything negative, no matter how minor it may be. You know, both of those biases aren't particularly optimal for, you know, making money in the betting markets. So what I'd like to say to people who still insist that betting on your own teams is something that you shouldn't do is that you're probably never going to eradicate bias when you're betting, even when you're betting on teams that don't involve your own club. You're always going to be in a situation where you'll just naturally find teams that you like more than others and teams that you dislike more than others. And, you know, there's always going to be fan bases out there that are just so repelling that it makes you dislike the team itself. Hello, Arsenal fans. And, you know, I guess we just somehow have to learn to like teams like this. I suppose through all this analysis, I forgot to mention that the actual result of the bet, it was actually winning for a change compared to everything else that seems to be happening over the last few months, which seems to be going wrong all the time. But yeah, Wigan did play badly. They had 4 shots, generated less than 0.5 XG in total. And yeah, they played like a team who was distraught given the news that their best player was about to leave. But yeah, it's a one-off game. Who knows if I was right or it's just natural variance. Welcome to gambling hell. I turn to you now, as I'm genuinely curious to hear your opinions about the way I described this bet. I want to see if you do believe I had a positive EV bet here, or if you think my analysis and judgment has been clouded by bias and fallacies. I am curious to know. Oh yeah, there is no Patreon anymore, so thank you for everyone who has supported me over the years. Ultimately, it became a point where making 2 videos a month compared to how much money it was bringing in and the time taken to make those videos, you know, it equated to like earning less than a quarter of the minimum wage or something. So I just couldn't justify spending the time doing it anymore. So thank you to everyone who supported me over the years. And yeah, I guess I'm looking at new ways to try to monetize what I'm doing here. And you know, even mentioning the dirty word monetize, you know, there's enough of you out there that are feeling angry by that. So, you know, I'm sorry for making you angry, although I do enjoy reading people raging in the comments. So I guess I'm not that sorry after all. Anyway, bye.